right, you guys. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for joining us tonight. As always, if you guys haven't met me yet, my name is Adam Lang, and I am just super, super excited to have you guys with us tonight. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited here because we're about to dive into what it actually takes to win in Denver's real estate market right now. And this market is definitely unlike anything that we've really seen ever before. Definitely nothing that we've seen in the last 12 to 15 years. And I'm also really excited because my co-host Ben Adams is with me again. He's one of the top mortgage lenders in the entire country, and he's got a wealth of knowledge he's going to be sharing with us tonight. So by the end of tonight's masterclass, you guys are definitely going to have a crystal clear just understanding of the entire home buyer process from start to finish. You're also going to learn those 3 home buyer mistakes that I've been teasing in some of the emails I've been sending you leading up to tonight. So you're definitely going to want to stick around for that. And also just some practical tips on how to boost your credit score by as much as 60 points in the next 3 months. You guys really just want more than anything for you guys to be in the best position possible for whenever that day may come for you to buy a home. So tonight's going to be full of a lot of great info. We are going to be giving you guys a lot of this kind of information by fire hose. There's going to be a ton of stuff coming at you. So really excited to share all of that with you guys. But also don't forget, at the end, we're going to be doing a live Q&A. So you're definitely going to want to stick around for that. And on that note, we're also going to have some bonus resources for everybody that sticks around that you can't get anywhere else. So you're going to definitely want to enjoy taking advantage of that stuff. But just a quick housekeeping tip before we get started. If you do have questions, as I mentioned, since we're going to be giving you a ton of info, as much as we possibly can over the next about 60 minutes. If you do have any questions while we're going through this stuff, feel free to drop any feedback or any questions in the chat. And Ben will be monitoring that, and if possible, we'll just address those questions in real time. Otherwise, we'll save them till the end, and we'll definitely have those be the first ones we answer during that live Q&A. So don't worry if you guys don't get your question answered immediately. We'll definitely make sure it does get answered before we finish tonight. And with all of that being said, let's just jump right into it. I think let me really quick go back to this first slide. Sorry, guys, I was looking at a couple things before we get started. In today's webinar, we're going to go over a few different things that you guys can see here, but I really wanted to start off by just asking you all just what your biggest challenge might be right now. These are the 4 that we're seeing the most common in today's market. Saving for a down payment, kind of that myth that you need 20% down. Also just understanding the market, understanding that there's different prices, mortgage rates, all this stuff keeps fluctuating. Also just the actual contract phase, talking about how to write competitive offers and get yours to actually stick and win. And then also just a lot of just information tonight about how to find the right home. I noticed that a few people that are on tonight are from out of state, so for you guys specifically, this will be great info to just really understand how this is still possible, even if you don't live right now here in Colorado. But let's just, again, talk a little bit first about Ben, my co-host, and what makes him such a valuable person to be with us tonight. So Ben, he's a Colorado native. He's actually also a friend of mine for going on probably about 30 plus years. We went to high school together and actually both are CU buffs. Over 22 years of industry experience. He's personally funded over $300 million in home loans, which is pretty awesome. Helped over 700 families. I'm sure that number is even higher since he initially sent this over to me. He's a 4-time Scotsman Guide Award winner for production excellence, and he's just an active real estate investor. So he practices what he preaches here. Personal portfolio of over 20 units across 3 states. A lot of those are vacation rentals, and I've even had the pleasure of staying in a couple with him and just learning a little bit more about that whole investment strategy. So he's going to share a lot of that with us tonight. So welcome, Ben. Hope you're having a good day so far. What's up?
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for the warm introduction. Wow, what a powerful way to get introduced. I appreciate that so much. And guess what? Now it's my turn to introduce you. And why should you listen to Adam? Well, Adam has over 55 Google reviews with Adam Sells Denver. He's also the co-host with me of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. Adam was in the top 10% of Colorado agents last year with over $8 million in personal sales, despite this being a really challenging market, one of the most challenging markets in the last 20 or 30 years. And he also ranked fifth in Denver out of 344 Denver agents in 2024 with eXp Realty. Really powerful stuff. And then also a Denver native and has lived in Colorado here for over 42 years. So, Adam, thank you for having me on, and I'm so glad to be here.
Thanks, man. It's nice having somebody else say this instead of telling them ourselves. So we definitely both just have a lot of experience more than anything else, guys. We just wanted to just give you a little bit of credibility behind who we are and why we're really passionate about this, and how we really just enjoying doing these homebuyer master classes every single week. Just hopefully you guys are going to get as much value out of these as some of our past guests have. But with that being said, let's just kind of jump right into it. So we're going to go through a lot tonight, as I said. So we're going to start off just talking about the local market here in Denver, Colorado. So the rates, they've been in the news quite a bit recently. In fact, just last week, we had the lowest interest rate over 10 months. It was at 6.55%. It's gone up a little bit since then. In the past few days, it's up to 6.71 as of this morning. But more than anything else, just going to talk through what that means, how that relates to buyer and seller activity today here in the Denver market. So the first of the 3 slides that I prepared for you guys that have to do with the most recent data available. I get all my data from a website that puts out monthly and also weekly data known as DMAR, the Denver Metro Association of Realtors. So very accurate, up-to-date, very credible information here. So first and foremost, just talking about this past month. So they send us the data at the end, or I should say the beginning of the following month. So the most recent stuff I have is for July of this year, 2025. The busy summer market is always kind of slowing down after the 4th of July, and it's been proving to be the same this year over the past 6 weeks. Kids are now, back in school. A lot of people are starting out this week back in school. So families are a little bit more focused on those routines, and fewer people are just really out shopping right now for homes. A little side note, that's definitely the case for any families that are considering buying a home that has to do with school districts, and they want their kids to start the fall semester in their new home. So with a lot of the homes being purchased, our families, that does affect also this kind of end of summer slowdown. I'd say, kind of piggybacking off of that, don't expect a fall rush of buyers. It really rarely happens unless mortgage rates drop significantly or we see a big increase in income. We are hearing some, teasing that we might see an interest rate drop on September 20th. So we might have a little bit of a surge in the fall this year. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. And then last but not least, if you're a seller and you really need to list or reduce your price, now is better than later. This is going to continue to get a little bit slower and slower. So it's good info just to kind of keep in mind. And then for buyers, so hopefully most of you guys that are on tonight, if you are an aspiring Denver home buyer, a few little nuggets of information for you guys. So there are now more homes for sale than we've seen in over 13 years. So there's a very high inventory of listings, and it's an incredible time to be a buyer. It's in fact being called the best time to be a buyer in Denver in the past 13 years. So obviously there's some challenges right now too. So I don't want to say that, blindly without understanding that there are a lot of uphill battles for a lot of us, but it's still a great time, if possible, to be a Denver home buyer right now. I would say though, you don't need to rush, take your time, compare homes. You have a lot more inventory to choose from, and you have more negotiation power and leverage as a buyer. Sellers are starting to lower prices to attract buyers. In fact, this past month in July, over half of the homes that went under contract did have at least one price cut in the month of July. And those price cuts are starting to be significantly larger in size, in dollar amount. So you might need to see, as many as 12 to 15 homes right now before finding the perfect one. That's actually the number for the month of July. It was 12 showings is what it was taking on average for a home to go under contract.
Good to know.
Yeah. And then one more slide, Ben, and then I'll pass it over to you to get some insight from you on some of the mortgage related stuff. I think this is actually the most powerful of the 3 slides that I've prepared, though, on this topic. So inventory, like I said, is dropping. Inventory is extremely high right now, but the inventory of new homes is dropping week over week. I think many sellers at this point are just realizing they might want to wait until springtime to list at that point. New listings are also slowing down, especially as we head into fall and winter. Buyer activity is a little bit flat, no big jump week to week. Odds of selling are still a little bit low compared to last year, but they have ticked up slightly over the past week. Showings are also up over the past week to 2 weeks, as opposed to the month of July, which is great to see. So I think there are a little bit more optimistic buyers out there in the market. But homes are, like I said earlier, sitting longer. They're taking a little bit longer than in the past. In fact, I think it's up to like 45 days on average is what I saw earlier this morning. So Price cuts are common and they're getting bigger than last year. So as a buyer, reading through a lot of this stuff, this is all good news for the most buyers out there. Ben, I'll just kind of also do this slide before I pass it back to you. So I just wanted to share with everybody too, before we dig into this, I've got this really great, it's 5 videos. It's over 2.5 hours of content. And it basically goes through 5 steps of the home buyer journey. So we're going to go through all of that also tonight. But if you guys have any questions and you just want to kind of go back and, maybe dig a little deeper into a certain specific portion of this, I definitely would recommend you guys also check out those video resources. They're free. You can go to homebuyervideos.adamsoulsdenver.com to grab those, and that might be helpful for you too.
Yeah, well, lots of really exciting data there, Adam. Thank you for sharing all of that. How do we interpret that? What I'm hearing is that with the higher inventory numbers, buyers have more options. There's more homes for sale. Interest rates are the lowest they've been in about 12 months, which is another big positive. As you mentioned, over 50% of homes sold in July had price cuts or price reductions. And then that also doesn't include concessions. I'm seeing a lot of concessions as well right now in this Denver market where the seller is contributing a concession for the buyer that can be used to pay for closing costs, to buy the interest rate down on a permanent basis, or even do things like a temporary buy down. So lots of really, really exciting things. Yes, there are some challenges for buyers, and we're going to talk about how to overcome those. But before we get into that, let's talk about the buyer's roadmap really briefly. And I'm just going to be very brief here because we have a couple more slides that are going to touch on some of the really important parts of this. But when you think of the buyer's roadmap, there's really 8 things that are very, very important. Number 1, you want to meet with a real estate professional. Once you meet with that real estate professional, the next important step is to get pre-approved. You want to know what your options are, how much you qualify for. Are there any issues with your credit? You want to know all of that information right up front. Once you do get pre-approved, then at that point, that's when your home search starts on section number 3 there. Once you start looking for homes, you're going to identify a home that you want to make an offer on, which brings us to number 4. After you make an offer, you're going to go to step 5, which is the negotiation and contract process. Once you go under contract, at that point, escrow will be opened. You will turn in your earnest money, and the transaction will officially be in escrow. Number 7 is going to be the final details. During this time that you're in escrow, your lender is going to be working on your final mortgage approval, finalizing what those loan terms are. Your real estate agent is going to be helping with some of the same things on the real estate side. Once all of that has been approved and you're ready to go, then at that point, we move on to step number 8, which is closing, which is always a really, really exciting day.
Yeah, and Ben and I've actually created our own version of this to make it a little bit more simplified and also easier to remember. So we created this acronym, which is CLOSE. So obviously you would love to close on that home that you're trying to buy. So we have the CLOSE acronym, which is just, again, the 5 main primary steps of the home buyer journey. And that starts off with C, which is connect with a lender, somebody like Ben, to get pre-approved. Ben's going to talk in a lot more depth on the pre-approval process here in a second with some really good tips on how to make sure you're in the best position possible when that day comes. And the second letter is L, close for, CL. L is for looking at properties, just really finding that perfect home. We're going to talk through just some really cool strategies on how to be a little bit more kind of fine tuning and just easier to understand with your realtor, whoever you're working with to help find that home, just to understand what's the most important information to provide them. O is for offer submitted. So we're going to talk about how to craft a winning offer that stands out, how to really utilize negotiation tactics to make sure you've got the best possible contract once you get that offer accepted. S is for securing the deal. So understanding that there's what's called a contract to close, which is all these different dates and deadlines and how you can navigate through all of that. And then last but not least, E is for execute the closing, just doing that final walkthrough and the actual closing date. If you want to close on the right home, remember this CLOSE method.
Right. CLOSE, CLOSE. I love that.
Yeah, and let's just kind of kick this off with the C, which again is that pre-approval. Ben, you're the wealth of knowledge on this one. I'd love just to get your opinion on a few things. Maybe to start off with just a little bit more about where the interest rates are right now, maybe what you're expecting to have happen over the next 90 days. If you think this expected rate drop in the middle of September is actually going to happen, and if so, if that's going to move the needle much when it comes to more competition for people like tonight that are buyers and worrying about, is it going to get to be like it was a few years ago where there was, a line out the door for open houses and showings and 5 offers at the same time, all that crazy stuff.
Yeah, well, here you see some of the rates from today. Now, what's exciting about this is that interest rates, they're just coming off the floor for the last 12 months. We hit a 52-week low a couple of weeks ago. Prior to that, though, we were up in the high 6s and the 7s. So we've had a little bit of a retreat back with rates, which is really, really exciting, especially in this Denver market that is a little bit more costly than some other markets in the Midwest. So when you have some of these reductions in interest rate, it can really matter. But, just going back to step one right there, getting pre-approved for a mortgage, the reason that is so important, especially for folks here in Denver, is because there are so many options available. And a lot of times buyers will have these preconceived notions as far as what they think they qualify for. They think, for example, that you have to put 20% down, or your credit score needs to be 720. And a lot of times that's just not accurate. So I always encourage everyone to talk with a lender up front. You want to know what you're pre-approved for, what your options are. You also want to be able to verify your purchasing power. And then you also want to get an idea of what you're eligible for. We have affordable lending programs where we can do down payment assistance. We can do minimum down payment. We have income limits up to 170 or 180,000. So we have some phenomenal home loan affordable programs to really help first-time home buyers. And down payment assistance is another really popular one. So you just want to know what you're eligible for, what products are out there, so you can make an informed financial decision.
Very, very well said. So, we're not going to go into all the info that's on the screen, but there are a few financial must-haves. And I think the next slide's a little bit more detailed on this, but we'd love for you just to share with them, just kind of what's going to happen during this pre-approval process. What's some of the checklist items that they just might need to be aware of that they're going to need to put together before having a pre-approval done. And also would love for you just to share with everybody tonight a little bit more about how there's not all pre-approvals are created equal. Just talking through how there's, I think there's about maybe 3 main levels or categories of being pre-approved, and how, there's certain ones that have a lot more merit, especially if you are in the process of submitting an offer and including that pre-approval with the offer to really stand out and get that offer accepted.
Yeah, the bank that I work at, and being a former underwriter, I have always gotten all of my customers fully pre-approved. And a lot of banks, a lot of credit unions, correspondent lenders, even mortgage brokers will only get their customers pre-qualified. I know they sound very similar, but they're very, very different. So when you go through the pre-qualification process, that means that you formally applied with a lender, you filled out the application, and then the lender has pulled your credit. And they're pretty much just taking your word for whatever you put on the application. They're verifying what your credit score is, but you say you make $75,000 a year. All right, we're going to accept that. Now, they're accepting it initially, but it's still subject to underwriting. And so that's where a lot of the times things come up in underwriting when you only get pre-qualified. When you get pre-approved, you do the same first step with the lender, which is formally apply. So you fill out the application. But then at that point, the lender goes through and verifies everything on the application. So the first checkbox right there is proof of income. So if I am working with someone who is a wage earner, meaning that they get a W-2, I'm going to be asking for 2 years of W-2s. So 2023 and 2024. I'm also going to be asking for their 2 most recent pay stubs. If they're self-employed, I'll be asking for tax returns for the past couple of years. From there, we're going to have them sign our authorization form so we can go and verify their employment directly with their employer. We'll contact their employer. We'll ask them to fill out the verification of employment request. We'll get all of their earnings broken down, and we'll get all that information up front. We will also do a credit pull. With all 3 bureaus, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. We'll verify what the credit score is, but then more importantly, we'll also look at the monthly debts and obligations on the credit report. From there, we're going to collect all of the assets. So if someone, prospective home buyer, has retirement accounts, money market accounts, investment accounts, we're going to get all of those up front, and we're going to put those into the file. I already spoke about the debt obligations there. We're also going to go over what the customer, what their goals are for down payment. Now, a lot of times I'll talk with someone and their initial goal is to put 20% down, but I may have a program where I can present to them, just so you know, you are eligible for a reduced down payment. We have this 10% down payment option. Just so you know, this might be something that you want to consider. You're eligible for this down payment assistance loan. And so at that point, it just gives us an opportunity to present some other ideas just so they know what their options are. Once we have all of that information, we will send out the pre-approval. We'll even send the loan and all of these financials into underwriting up front. And then we'll send you that pre-approval letter that outlines everything that we've done. We've verified income. We've collected your financials. We know where the down payment's coming from. And the fact that everything has been pre-underwritten. And then that way, when you as the buyer start writing offers going to the seller, you can present this document and it says that you've done all of this due diligence. And it lets the seller know that you're a very serious, well-qualified buyer.
Love that, man. It's just another example of how preparation and being, very intentional on the front end, even if, a lot of the people tonight maybe aren't seriously considering buying until next year, just getting all of this kind of busy work, all of this stuff that maybe feels a little bit daunting at first, getting all of that compiled and ready now, just so when that day does come, you can have a much more thorough type of pre-approval. And that's really going to stand out, especially if we get to a point where it's a little bit more of a competitive market for buyers again. So I think that's a very
and I know Nick asked the question in the chat there, just kind of commenting that that's a lot of stuff. There are some things that we gather, but we try and make it as easy as possible. So I will send out an email to all of the prospective home buyers I'm working with. This is what we need. We include a secure upload link, and a lot of times folks can download their bank statements, they can download their W-2s and their pay stubs, and they can upload all of that right into the online portal. And it really helps expedite the process. So it sounds like a lot, but in most cases, it really only takes 5 to 15 minutes.
Love that. And this is actually, I think, probably my favorite slide for this first section when we're talking about pre-approval. So, Ben's talking about this, the different things that you guys are going to need to start compiling and putting together to do this pre-approval process. But once you've done that, and once you've actually applied for the mortgage, there are just as many things that you don't want to do, that you don't want to be, having happen once that happens. So Ben, share just a little bit quickly on these few that are probably the biggest and most important.
Yeah, and you wouldn't believe how often these things come up. Number one, and this is where I always start, don't ever co-sign on a loan for someone. There's two reasons why. Number one, if someone's asking you to co-sign, it means they literally do not have sufficient income to repay the debt. That's best case scenario. Or it means that they have a repeated pattern of behavior of not paying their debts or their bills on time. Either one of those is not good. And most importantly, if you co-sign, that debt will now show up on your credit report because you are formally responsible for it. So if it's an auto loan and the auto loan payment is $800, well, that has to be factored into your debt to income ratio. Now, there are some ways around that in some cases where that debt can be excluded, but it's not guaranteed and there's a lot of work involved. You also don't want to change banks. I had a customer a couple of weeks ago. They were moving all of their money back and forth between these two different financial institutions. She had 30 different transfers on one day. It makes things very, very difficult. So you don't want to be moving money around, and you don't want to be changing your bank in the middle of an application. You also don't want to be applying for any new credit cards or any new types of debt. All lenders have debt monitoring courtesy of the credit bureaus. A lot of lenders will also do soft pulls the day before closing. And if there is any new debt or if there's been any new inquiries, that could potentially jeopardize the deal. You also don't want to make any large purchases. I would say in this category, the number one thing that comes up the most is folks are so eager to go furnish their home, and they want to go over to American Family Warehouse and buy all of their home furniture before closing. And we don't want to recommend that because that can impact their credit card balances, which can then impact their credit score. So any large purchases, you want to hold off. And this is another really big one. You don't want to be depositing any cash into your bank accounts during the process. Cash deposits in the lending world are not allowed because they can't be verified. Sometimes I'll have customers and they'll say, I have $10,000 in a safety deposit box that I've been saving for the down payment. I just got to put it into my bank account. And a lot of times that can be very challenging. So this is another reason why you want to get pre-approved, just so you know what you need to do, what your options are, and then your lending professional can really give you some guidance.
Yeah, it's really good advice. I think the one about buying furniture right before closing on the new house, I'm sure there's been some pretty disappointed people over the, in the past that have done that and maybe had the whole deal fall through because of it, if they were really right on that edge of even getting pre-approved in the first place. So that would be a huge bummer. So hopefully that doesn't happen to anybody that's on tonight. So I love this part too. So we're going to also talk a little bit more about credit score. So, credit scores are something that I learned a lot actually from Ben on just once I got into this industry and started, working with different clients that had different questions about their credit scores and how to get them to be improved in order to qualify for better rates or just to qualify in general. So there's a few things that we're going to go over. One of them, this especially is important, this credit utilization score that Ben's going to talk about here in a second. But if you guys would like to dive a little bit deeper into this topic specifically, I'm going to be sending over a link at the end of tonight's class with a free copy of my credit repair playbook. So definitely check that out, where we go a lot more in depth on some of these topics that we're talking about right now. Oops. Ben, why don't you just share a little bit more about the credit utilization score, specifically how to keep it below that 30% level and just what that entails.
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. And I always love answering that question because when it comes to credit, people always think that I'm making my payment on time. Why is my credit score in the mid 600s if I've never missed a payment? And the reason for that, a lot of the times, is because of the credit utilization. And so credit utilization is relevant on revolving accounts. So things like in-store charge cards, credit cards, Visa, MasterCard, home equity line of credit. All of those are different types of revolving accounts. Now, most people don't know this, but your score is adversely impacted once that credit utilization rate goes over 30%. That's where it really starts to hit your score hard in a bad way. So if you have a credit card limit, or if you have a credit card and the limit is $10,000, you always want to keep that balance below $3,000 if your credit card limit is $10,000, because that would put you at a 30% utilization rate right there. So you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on your individual credit card accounts. So that's called the local credit utilization. But you also want to make sure that all of your accounts together, the combined limit and also the combined balances, is also less than 30%. So if I'm looking at an applicant and they have 5 credit cards maxed out, and this happens often because Americans don't understand how to navigate their finances and navigate credit cards. This is very, very common. But if all of your credit cards are maxed out, it is going to kill your score because of the utilization rate. So always try and keep that utilization rate at or below 30%.
And then one last thing I'll share on that one is if you have multiple credit cards, there's the global and also the local. What's the other one called?
Yes.
Yeah. Just being aware of that. All right, guys. So now we're going to talk about the next step here. So we did C in the close acronym. We did the C. Now we're doing the L, which is the location and just finding the perfect home for you. So since there are a few people that I know are from out of state on tonight, I want to touch on a couple things that are a little bit more specific to you guys, but everybody tonight will still get value from this. And that's just helping you better understand what you can do even early on before you go out and start looking at homes, just to really make sure that when that time comes, you're targeting the correct homes. You're not getting kind of stuck in the weeds and finding homes that maybe are great in certain aspects, but then you get emotional about certain things and realize that this just isn't the right home. And why do we even go out and look at this one? So the one way that I love to work on with my clients up front, especially the out-of-staters, is understanding what your priorities are. And a good way to do this is just as a little activity with your spouse, your partner, or maybe your family, whoever you're going to be living in the home with. Just, sit down at the dinner table one night and talk through what are your must-haves, what are your nice-to-haves, and what, if any, are deal breakers. So just a quick explanation of those three. A must-have would be a school district, for example. Maybe you're currently in a really great school district here in Denver, and you want to make sure your kids stay in the same school and have the same friends next year and all that good stuff. So that could be a must-have. You have to have a certain school district. A nice to have, one example I like to also use for, not everybody will get value from this one, but especially the out-of-staters that maybe aren't as familiar with certain sports and hobbies that are really popular out here in Colorado, is your garage. So what ends up always happening, I've had this happen myself with a few clients, is you move out here, maybe it's just a household that has two cars. Maybe it's the husband and wife each have their car. So they say, yeah, well, we just want a home with a two-car garage. That worked for us fine back home in the city. Maybe they were coming from Chicago or, big city. You come out to Colorado, all of a sudden you start picking up all these great activities and hobbies. You start picking up skiing, maybe backpacking and camping. Maybe you get mountain bikes for everybody in your family. All of that stuff needs to go somewhere. And a lot of times it ends up in the garage. So you'd be amazed at how quickly a two-car garage only can now fit one car because the other bay is full of stuff. So one really nice to have feature of a home out here in Colorado, where we have such a great outdoor active lifestyle, is going one size up on the garage size. Or we also just have some homes that have oversized two-car garages. So that would be a nice to have, and something that I frequently get asked about and have as a high priority nice to have for my clients when I'm going out and looking for homes for them. And a deal breaker could be kind of similar to what I said with the school district, but I'd say the only difference with the deal breaker would be it could also be something that is a negative. So instead of a must have, it could be something that's more of a negative, like maybe you have a son or a daughter with special needs. You don't want to be on a really busy street where you're going to be worrying about them. Or maybe it has to do with you're a little bit older in age, or maybe you have some sort of a physical ailment where you don't want to be going up and down stairs. So you only want to have a ranch style home. Well, telling me this type of information up front allows me to make sure that I'm curating the best possible list of homes where you're not, getting kind of overwhelmed with so many choices, and half of them don't even really fit what you're looking for. So going through that is really important. And this is also a great way for out-of-staters that are on tonight to understand that when you do come out and meet with me, or whoever you're working with, but when you come out and meet with a realtor, we're already 2 steps ahead. We're already able to have this curated list of properties to go out and look at, and we're not wasting half of your trip out here on, stuff that really doesn't need to happen. So that's my first tip. And then my second tip is also just as important. And this is a really good exercise as well. And it's understanding that there are basically 3 primary characteristics of a home purchase. And that's going to be, when you're buying a home, you want to be focused on price, location, and condition. So condition is the condition of the home. It could be the age of the home, or even it could just be the finishes, or the how updated it is, or is it maybe a little bit older and needing some fixing up, that kind of stuff. So what happens is, unless you just have a pocketbook with an endless amount of money in it, 2 out of these 3 are achievable. Sometimes all 3 are, but what's really great is at least to understand which 2 of these 3 are the most important to you. And that's also going to really help during this initial phase of curating homes for you guys to start looking at. So let's just say that you have a price point of, you really don't want to go above $500,000. And you know that your location, you really want to be in the, let's just use an area that I used to live in called Sloan Lake. So I know some of you guys are here in Denver. I think Tara, I think I saw you. I think you're from Denver. For the local people that are already here, Sloan Lake is an awesome area. It's got some of the best outdoor active lifestyle within Denver, in my opinion. But it's also very expensive. So when you have a $500,000 budget and you definitely want to be in that Sloan Lake area, this third one, condition in this example, is going to probably have to have a little bit of give. You're going to have to maybe buy a home that has a little bit older mechanical systems. Maybe it was built in the 70s as opposed to a brand new construction home. You're going to have to usually give on whatever that third one is that's the least important. I'll do one more quick example. Let's just say that you really want a new construction home. You want a brand new home that's turnkey. Everything is brand new, clean. You walk in and it's your home, first person that's ever lived in the home. So condition is really important to you, as well as price. So maybe you also have that same $500,000 budget. Well, in this example, if you have that price point and you have that type of home that you're looking for, that new build home, that new construction home, well, the location might be a little bit limited. You might have to go a little bit to the north of Denver, which would be in an area like Erie or Reunion, where there's a lot of new build communities. Or you might have to maybe go a little bit further southeast in Aurora, where there's also a lot of these new build communities that are at that $500,000 price point. There are a few in that Sloan Lake area, but they're looking to be probably maybe 700,000 to 800,000, if not even higher. So this is just a good, exercise for you guys to do, is to understand which of those are the most important. And that's going to really help a realtor like myself give you guys very specific and hopefully realistic homes to start searching for. Is there anything you want to add to that, Ben, before I move on?
I would just add very briefly that the reason I love this right here is because home ownership and purchasing, when done the right way, it's about putting a plan together and having a really strong vision. Let's face it, going through this process can be very emotional. You think about the dreams and the hopes of your family, and you can imagine your family in the backyard and in the neighborhood. And that part of us sometimes will lead with that emotional part. But when you can have that vision and that plan, it helps you create some boundaries as far as where do you want to live, what location, what are you comfortable affording, and it just allows for a much better purchase and home buying experience, and it allows you to make better financial decisions as well.
Absolutely. So just a quick little break here, you guys. All of this stuff is going to be sent to you in an email after tonight's masterclass. But on the list of links that I'm going to be sharing with you guys, there's two that are really, really important, not just for out-of-staters, but also for you guys that are already here locally here in Denver. And on my website, I have this interactive map, and I've got a little screenshot of it here on the laptop here. And I've got over 20 of just the main, biggest, most popular areas, neighborhoods within Denver. And it's interactive. You can click each of these individually. It'll give you demographic info, listings that are currently live and available in those areas, what school districts, just everything you can think of. And, even people that are already here in Denver, I know myself included, there's parts of Denver that I really did not know about at all until I got into real estate. And some of those areas are actually some of my favorite areas now in Denver that I didn't even know existed for the first, 30 plus years of my life. So even if you are local, I'd still recommend checking that out. And then also on my YouTube channel, if you guys search Living in Denver with Adam, I've got over 125 videos that go in depth on pretty much everything you can think of here in the Denver market. And I know this is stuff that I've got available for you guys, but while I'm talking about YouTube, definitely also check out Ben's YouTube channel, which is American Money 101. He talks about finance related stuff, but there's also a ton of great content there for anybody that's kind of in this initial phase and thinking about mortgages and just how to be in the best position possible and just being very sound financially as you go into this really exciting time in your lives. A couple other ones too that I'll just talk about a little bit later on at the end. All right, Ben. So this is probably my favorite of the 5 steps, which is crafting a winning offer. And I'm going to share a couple things first, and then I'd love to get Ben's perspective, because what's great about Ben is he sees a lot more volume than I do, because he's dealing with, a ton of clients on a regular basis, and they all have unique scenarios when it comes to the contracts, the offers, all the stuff. So I think Ben has a very unique perspective on this that he'll share with you guys here in a second. But the offer, what's so important about the offer is this is, in a lot of cases, your only chance to really make that impression with the seller. And a couple of years ago, when it was a very competitive market, this became, a very specific skill set to have to really have any chance at all of getting yours accepted over the others. But to kind of take it back a step, for anybody that's maybe a first-time home buyer that's not really that familiar with this process, if you go out and start looking at homes with somebody like myself, and we've done a really good job with figuring out what neighborhoods and all that good stuff, and we've identified this beautiful home that you want to buy. Your wife, your kids, everybody loves it. It's got a great backyard, great kitchen for entertaining, all that good stuff. You got that emotional attachment a little bit maybe now to the home. You want to make sure it gets accepted. Well, there's basically 3 outcomes for every offer that gets submitted. You can either have it, number 1, get accepted, which is always the best. And when I say get accepted, meaning getting it accepted as written. So you write the offer with a realtor like myself. We put in all of the specifics, the price, the closing date, everything that's involved. And maybe the seller might just say, you know what, that's a great offer. I'm going to accept it as is. It's pretty rare, but it can happen. The second scenario here would be the opposite. They just read it and they say, you know what, we're not even going to entertain this. We're just going to straight up decline it. I've never had this happen to me, probably because I really take this part of the process seriously. But that can happen, especially if you're working with somebody that's not putting this extra effort into the offer. But this third one is the most common. And this third one is basically what's known as a counter proposal or a counter offer. And what happens here is we'll draft up this offer, we'll send it over to the sellers, we'll make it, as great as we possibly can, more specifically, making it in a way that's really meeting them in the middle where it's a win-win situation. We'll talk about that here in a second. But what's going to happen a lot of times is we're submitting an offer and they're going to come back and try and counter us on a couple points. Maybe it's nothing major. Maybe it's just something like, well, you put September 1st as the closing date. We're going to be out of town that week, so we'd like to push it out a week. So it could be something simple like that. And hopefully that's no issue at all. More often though, it might be a price. Maybe you offer $30,000 less than what it's listed for. Maybe they counter offer back and meet you in the middle and say, well, we'll accept, but at a price point $15,000 higher, or kind of meeting in the middle. So this counter offer is the most common. But to talk now though about just specifically how to get your offer accepted and craft this winning offer, I think the biggest thing is really understanding that for a lot of sellers, it's not just the price that's the most important when it comes to them choosing your offer over others. There's a lot of different scenarios when it comes to sellers in the world and why they're selling, what their motivation is for selling. A lot of stuff could be a little bit hard to talk about. Maybe they're getting divorced. Maybe it's an older, maybe it's somebody that's trying to help sell their parents' house. I'm dealing with this right now with a client where their aunt is going through dementia. So he's helping her sell the home. So there's some unique scenario like that going where for some of those, it might not be price. It might just be they want to get it sold as quickly as possible. It might be something else. It might be right now, for example, we're getting into the fall semester of school. Maybe we get a home that we love and we put out an offer and we want to close on it November 1st. Well, if we kind of get a little bit more info from the sellers before submitting the offer, we might find out that they really want their son to finish his senior year of high school where they currently are. They really don't want to have a closing date until December 15th. So the reason I'm bringing all this up is it's so important to build a relationship as a buyer's agent, somebody like myself, with the other party, the seller's agent, and getting some of this info and really understanding that it might not just be price, it might be other motivation that's more important to them. And if you're able to get that out of the seller, you're then able to craft an offer that is a win-win. It's really speaking to their needs as well as ideally, most importantly, it's working best out for you too. But a long-winded way of just saying that you can definitely create a win-win scenario. And those are always not only the most pleasant type of transactions to be involved in, but also a lot higher likeliness that it'll make it all the way to the closing table because you're building that relationship early on in the process. Ben, I want to share a couple strategies on this, but before I do you want to maybe just chime in on anything before I do?
Well, I was going to say that that's one reason that I always enjoy working with you when you're on the buy side. And something that I respect tremendously about you is that you are not afraid to pick up the phone and call the listing agent and ask some of these questions. You put your detective hat on. Why is the seller motivating? What other considerations are important to them? Is there anything that I need to know? And the reason that you ask those questions is because you are trying to put this offer together in a way that meets all of their goals while also representing your buyers. Because if they're looking for a certain amount of earnest money, or if they're looking to close on a specific day, if they're looking for certain dates and deadlines, and you submit all of that in tandem with what's important to your buyer, maybe your buyer wants the seller to pay for the closing costs, or they're looking for a price reduction. It is possible to craft a winning offer that can be or is a win-win. And one thing that I see a lot being on the lending side is I'll have these conversations with other buyers agents and, why did you write the offer this way? What did the listing agent have to say? And well, I never spoke to him. There's also this misconception in the real estate world that all sellers are looking to close every deal as fast as possible. And that's just not the case. And so a lot of buyers agents have this misconception that we're just going to try and rush this through, get it closed as quick as we can. And that that a lot of times that's just not what the seller is looking to do. So having these phone calls up front, identifying what's important, allows your buyer's agent to pass that information on to the buyer so you can craft that winning offer with a higher likelihood of success and getting it accepted.
Yeah, it's really good info there. The other kind of nugget I want to share with you guys, one of kind of my expert kind of negotiation tactics here, is this post-closing occupancy agreement. And I think Ashley just asked what a PCOA is. So perfect timing, Ashley. So a post-closing occupancy agreement, what makes this so special and such a great example of getting more info out of the seller and crafting this winning offer is a lot of people are selling, but then they're also trying to buy something else. And this is a very common kind of a, not a roadblock, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a challenge to get past as a seller, because what happens is those sellers are anxious to find their next home, and maybe they found it and they want to write an offer on the new home. Well, they're able to do that. In some cases, they're able to do that without it being a conditional offer, meaning they need to sell their current home first. But oftentimes that is part of this, where they need to sell their home before they can buy the new home. And what's great about a PCOA, a post-closing occupancy agreement, what happens here is you have the closing date earlier in the timing. So let's just say you do a post-closing occupancy agreement where the home is actually sold in 30 days, but you're allowing the current seller, the existing person, to stay in the home for an additional period of time. It can be up to 60 days. You can have it be completely free of charge. You can have it where they're paying a daily amount. I like doing a daily amount. That way it motivates them a little bit to maybe still get out a little bit early if they have a little bit extra money that they can save if they get out before. But anyways, it allows them to still sell earlier, get all of the proceeds from that house. And then when they write an offer on their new home, it's not a conditional offer. When I have clients, like for example, right now, one of my listings, if we receive an offer and it's a great offer, maybe it's full price, but in the fine print, it says it's a conditional sale of property offer, meaning that the only way they're going to buy this is if their home sells. I pick up the phone, I talk to the buyer's agent, and they say, well, yeah, they just listed their home yesterday. Well, that's not that optimistic, in my opinion, especially right now where it's such a difficult time to sell homes. So, that might really not be that smart of an idea to accept that offer, even if it is for full price, as opposed to taking away that conditional sale of property aspect to it and still being able to get to the closing table with a lot more confidence. What can happen is if you do accept an offer like that, a conditional sale offer as a seller, maybe you're waiting for a month. Maybe you've even gone all the way to the very end where you're supposed to close next week or in 2 weeks, but the home still hasn't sold. Well, that buyer, by having that in the contract, they're able to basically walk away, recoup their earnest money, that deposit that they're putting down up front to get under contract. They're able to walk away with really no hair off their back. They're totally able just to walk away free and clear with no issues. And in the meantime, you guys have had, that seller has had their home off the market for a month, hoping that it would get it to the closing table. So long-winded way of just saying that there are some very strategic ways to really make sure that the offer that we're putting out there is fitting the needs of the seller as best as possible. All right, so now we're at the fourth. So this is the S, which is basically, I think, one of the most important parts, and I'm really, really passionate about this one as well. Ben, before I kind of dig into the home inspection part, maybe you can talk a little bit about appraisal, since that's a little bit more tied to mortgages, especially if you guys don't know, if you are getting a loan, if you're going to be financing your home purchase, it's going to pretty much require that an appraisal is done, unless you're just putting down a ton of equity down payment. Oh, Ben, I can't hear you. Let me unmute you.
Oh, thank you. The reason for the appraisal is to protect the bank and also the buyer. So when you have a sales contract, you have an agreed upon price through the sales contract between the buyer and the seller. And so when the bank lends the money to complete the purchase for the buyer, they want to make sure that the collateral, which is the property itself, is worth at least the agreed upon sales price as outlined in the contract. So the bank wants to know, to protect their interest, that the asset is worth as much as outlined in the contract, but it also protects the buyer as well, because the buyer is going to get an opportunity to review the appraisal. And in the event that it comes in less, well, they're going to have the ability to either cancel the contract, or they're going to have the ability to go back to the drawing board with the seller and renegotiate. So it's a tool that can protect both sides. Different loan types will have different appraisal requirements. Now, if you are a conventional buyer, and if you're putting usually 15% down or more and you're well qualified, and also if there are a bunch of recent sales in the neighborhood, you might get an appraisal waiver. And I'm working with a couple of buyers right now, one out in Iowa, two more here in Denver, and we actually got all three of those got appraisal waivers. And that's exciting because it helps expedite the process. We don't need to charge for the appraisal if we're waiving that. So normally the appraisal fee is anywhere from $600 to $750, depending on the appraisal type. To qualify for that, usually you have to put a little bit of a bigger down payment down, but it's not a bad thing. It's a very positive thing when you get the appraisal, because you want to know that the home is actually worth what you're paying for it.
Yeah. It's one of those things where if you're on the buying side, you kind of want that appraisal, just because that'll give you another opportunity to negotiate if it doesn't come in at that appraised value. And it gives you a little bit of more confidence that you're paying the right amount for the home. On the flip side, though,
which is also another reason to get the inspection as well, right? Can
Yeah.
be another form of leverage and being able to negotiate based off of what you find in the inspection.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I want to just dive into that really quickly. So you guys, for any of you out-of-staters, we have a couple things out in Colorado that might be a little bit unique to where you're not as familiar with. One of those being radon. So radon is this odorless gas that oftentimes will get trapped underneath a home if there's a crawl space. So if you have a home that's built where there's a space of air between the basement or ground level of the home and the foundation, if there's a space between those two, oftentimes this radon gas can kind of get trapped in there, and it can be harmful. So what happens is during an inspection out in Colorado, it's very common to pay about $60 to $80 for a radon test to be done as part of the inspection. And it's pretty common that these radon levels come up high enough where it's recommended that a radon mitigation system be installed. So these are usually about $1,500 to have installed. So it's not a huge expense, but an example of something where if you do an inspection and that comes in high, 9 times out of 10, if not, to be honest with you, I've never not seen this, is the seller will agree to either give that $1,500 or so as a seller concession at closing, or they'll just agree to have that installed and done themselves before the closing date. So that's one where if there currently is not a radon mitigation system in the house that you're interested in, I always recommend adding that to the inspection, because it is very common to get that, again, that level high enough where we can negotiate and get that paid for. Another big one is a sewer scope. So these are common pretty much anywhere in the US, but the reason they're especially important out here in Colorado is we have a lot of different types of trees out here, and a lot of these trees have a kind of mind of their own after they get bigger in size and age, where these tree roots start to impede sometimes on the sewer line, which is a line that oftentimes is either cast iron, or back in the day it was even clay, and it'll go from the home usually out to the center of the street in front of the home and connect to the main sewer line. So what will happen oftentimes is the sewer line will get inspected, and this is about $125 fee typically out here in Denver, and we'll find out that there's some issues going on. They'll put a camera down and go through the entire line, or as far as they can make it, and they'll identify if there's any areas that have damage, maybe from tree roots, or oftentimes they'll identify what's called a belly, which is kind of like a low point in the pipe where they'll see standing water. And sometimes a little bit of that, not a big deal, but if there's enough of that, that could be a really good indication that you're going to start having backups in your house and potentially some very costly repairs needing to be done. So this is one where $125 up front could save you $10, $15, $20,000 or maybe even more in the future if you do run into some major issue with this. So it's just peace of mind. It's very low cost versus the value you get from them. So those are two that I always recommend in addition to just the actual home inspection. And the reason the home inspection, though, is so important, as Ben alluded to a second ago, is this gives us the opportunity to then have what's called an inspection objection. This is part of that contract to close phase where we have a time where we're going to have the home inspected, and then we're getting them the opportunity to address any concerns with the seller and request either that those are repaired, fixed, replaced, or there's just a dollar amount that's agreed to as a seller concession that'll be at the closing. So really good examples of this usually are health and safety related. So maybe it's the breaker panel where all of the electrical goes into. Maybe it's in the garage. Maybe some of the stuff is loose and it's the inspectors identify that it's kind of dangerous. So this would be a great one where we say, you know what, we're going to object to this electrical issue that was identified. We'd like a licensed electrician to either repair this or a $2,000 seller concession or a seller credit at closing. So this is just, I'm using these examples just to give you guys kind of an idea of some of the negotiation abilities that we have, some of the leverage that we'll have at this phase of the contract to close. And, this isn't a time to nickel and dime people. This isn't a time to be asking for every little thing. It's a 25-year-old home. We're not going to complain about some scratches on the front door or a missing, piece of baseboard in the living room. Little things like that are really not that important in the big scheme of things. It's the big items. It's the health and safety related or just things that we know are going to be very costly, like that sewer line issue. So inspections are
and let me jump in really quick, Adam, if you don't mind, because I'm working with some buyers right now, and they are doing some of the steps that you are recommending. They ended up getting the sewer line, and there's a little additional cost for them to do that, but they found that part of the sewer line was partially collapsed, and
wow.
they requested the seller to replace the entire sewer line, and the seller agreed to. They just found out today. So the seller is going to replace the entire sewer line. And as you mentioned earlier, that's typically a $15,000 to $20,000 expense. This is a 40-year-old home, and the sewer line is made out of clay. And so they are just ecstatic. On top of that, they're getting a credit. They're doing a 2-1 buy down, and so their payment's going to be lower. So it's just turned into this very, very positive transaction, both on the real estate, but then also the mortgage and the lending side as well.
Mm-hmm. The only other thing I'll share with you guys is I get this question all the time with clients that are buying new construction homes. They say, Adam, why would I pay for an inspection? This is a brand new home. And I'll tell you what, you guys, I bet you just as often as the old homes, these new build communities have a lot of things that come up also when the buyer does agree to see the value in paying for an inspection, even though it is a new build community. So I think that, even though it's brand new, it's still really important to have an inspection done. Even in this case, the sewer line example that Ben and I have been sharing, one example I had recently was in a community up in Broomfield where there was actually a bunch of construction debris in that sewer line when they did this sewer scope inspection. And if they didn't catch that, this, nails, but also like a bunch of paper and, debris from, from installing all of the homes in that area. And that could have been a major, major issue. And luckily they still agreed to have this done on the front end. The other thing though I'll share though is for people that just still are really hesitant and they're pushing back and just saying, no, I don't need to spend money on an inspection up front. It's brand new. In that case, I will also at least try and motivate them and convince them that it's still worth having one done, but doing it at about month 9 or 10 after they've purchased and are living in the home. Most new build communities will offer a 1-year warranty. So by doing it in at like month 9 or 10, you're able to, at that point, maybe even identify a few other things after living in the home for a bit. Maybe some cabinet doors that aren't fitting quite right. Maybe the venting of the washer and dryer just seems like it's not working exactly as it should. Things like that you might not even notice until you've lived in the home for a bit. you're able to do it at like month 9 or 10 and still have enough time to get that stuff covered under the home warranty that's typically 12 months. If you don't do that and you identify this stuff, in 2 years, you're kind of out of luck. You got to pay for it yourself. All right, Ben, why don't you kick us off on this final step, number 5, closing and final walkthrough.
Hey, this is the really fun part. And on the day of closing, usually within 24 hours, sometimes it's that same day. If not the same day, it's the day before. You're going to do the final walkthrough with your real estate agent. And so the reason that's important is because if there was any work that was supposed to get done during the inspection period, this is your opportunity to verify that the work has been completed. It's also your last opportunity to walk through the property before you are responsible for it. You want to make sure that there's nothing materially different from when you wrote the contract, that sometimes there can be some amenities, a chandelier, curtains, plantation shutters that are going to be included as part of the sale. But sometimes sellers don't always realize that maybe they take the chandelier down. So you want to make sure that everything is in line with the contract. Nothing's missing, nothing is out of order, and all improvements or remedies have been completed. And then after you complete the final walkthrough, at that point, you're going to be going to the closing table on the day of closing. You are going to meet, if you're a buyer, you're going to meet with the title company. Normally, that's going to be in the title office. There's going to be a notary present. Usually, your real estate agent is present. Your loan officer or your lending representative may be there as well. It's not required. I love to always try and be there for all of my customers if I can be. So that's something that I love to do. You're going to sign the real estate documents. You're going to sign the title documents. You're also going to sign the loan documents. And then you're going to sign the transfer of ownership documents in front of a notary, which is a witness. They're going to notarize everything. You're also going to bring in any cash that might be due on the day of closing. So your down payment, anything else, you'll bring those funds in the form of a certified funds cashier's check. And once you bring that in, once you sign everything, then the title company will disperse or release all the funds. They will pay off the seller. They will pay all of the third parties. They will apply the down payment to your financing. The lender has also sent them the wire for the loan, and they will provide the oversights and certify everything. And once that has happened, that is when the home officially becomes yours, and you'll get your keys from your real estate agent.
Yep. And just a little side note, if you were to do one of those post-closing occupancy agreements, you would still go to closing day just like normal, but instead of going to the house afterwards, most likely that current seller will now become your tenant for up to 60 days. So there is, occasionally a scenario like that. But the other thing that I wanted to just briefly touch on is this final walkthrough, and specifically just how important this is. And I get a lot of people that are clients of mine that, initially early on in the process, when they start, going through the final scheduling of the closing day, and I talk to them about, okay, well, when would you like to go look at the home one last time for our final walkthrough? And they say, well, we'll just go there, after closing. The reason that the final walkthrough is so important, and what a final walkthrough is you're actually going there ideally within about 24 hours or less before the time of the closing, is to just, make sure that everything is as expected. When you write up an offer and you get under contract, we have what's called inclusions and exclusions, fixtures. There's some of these words that unfortunately some people kind of hear it in a different way, or they kind of maybe don't abide by it as much as they should. Where an example would be, maybe there's this really cool chandelier in the living room and it wasn't mentioned in anything on the contract other than just, it wasn't included in the offer. It wasn't specifically mentioned. Well, if that's the case, then that comes with the house. Well, maybe the sellers, have some sentimental value with that chandelier, and you go do the final walkthrough with me the day of closing, and man, why is it so dark in the living room? Oh my gosh, there's a hole in the ceiling where a light used to be, and now it's just a blank plate. Well, this is something that hopefully we're able to identify and catch before closing. If we're able to identify it before closing, we can bring that up and either have that seller get back over here and put that back up, or maybe negotiate a dollar amount that they're going to have to also include as a payment for replacement for a new light fixture. So that's just one example. But I'll share a quick story with you guys that's even a bigger, aha moment of, oh my gosh, thank gosh we went and did this before the closing. A lot of times homes are vacant. So a lot of times a seller has already moved on and the home is sitting empty. Maybe it's been sitting empty for a couple months even. And in the springtime, out here in Colorado, we've got pretty big time winters where you got a lot of snow and it's pretty cold, where if you have irrigation, if you have sprinkler lines, oftentimes you'll, make sure that you're winterizing those. Well, somebody in one of the homes, they were preparing for the springtime. So they were turning back on their sprinklers and getting it ready for the season. And they forgot to just tighten up this tiny little screw that keeps air from being in the pipes in the winter to keep it from freezing. Well, when you turn it back on in the summertime, you got to make sure you just close this one little bolt or this little nut on the end of one of the pipes. They forgot to do that. So go over for the final walkthrough, and there's about 6 inches of water in the basement. Big time. Big time. Whoa, what's going on here? Another example, though, if we didn't catch that, if we didn't go over there and we just went straight to the closing, completed it, and then super excited, got the keys, as Ben was talking about, and then we go over to the house, can you imagine how you would go from a 10 of excitement down to a 1 of excitement and
Oh my gosh.
disappointment? I mean, horrible. So just, it takes such little amount of effort to do that final walkthrough. And for a few of you guys that are on tonight that are out of staters, this doesn't have to be something that you're necessarily doing. This is something that I always, offer to do myself, just as part of one of the services that I'm always providing my out-of-state clients. So more than anything else, long-winded way of just saying that it's so important to always do that final walkthrough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 3 big mistakes that home buyers are making today that are costing them big time. We've kind of touched on these already, but want to just use this as a way to kind of recap some of the most important aspects right now of home ownership and being a buyer here in Denver. The first one is overlooking hidden costs. So there's a few of these. I want Ben to share a little bit more on a few, but the one that I wanted to bring up is property taxes. So every state's different when it comes to property taxes. In Colorado, it typically is about 0.6, so about half of 1% of what the property's assessed value is what the annual property taxes are going to be. So a lot of times people overlook this. They see this beautiful home, $500,000 home, and they are expecting the property taxes to be, average for Denver, about that 0.5%. So they're expecting to maybe be paying about $2,500 a year in property taxes. Well, maybe they didn't have a very educated real estate agent, and they didn't really go into depth on this before going under contract. Maybe they found out that actually it's in a new build community and it's actually 1.6% of a property tax. Or maybe there's a metro tax district, which is a short-term additional tax that's placed on this neighborhood because it is becoming a new community and they have more expenses going on with sidewalks and streetlights and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, that same $500,000 home, now instead of $2,500 a year, you might be looking at $7,500 a year. And this is also an example of how with Ben, with any sort of a lender that you're working with that's very competent and really going above and beyond, they're going to ask for these types of things when kind of going through this pre-approval process and factoring in these hidden costs just to make sure that you're aware of them and also that you're able to still qualify for your loan and also be capable of making those payments. So the property taxes is a big one, but there's definitely a few others that are just as important to make sure you're keeping your eye on. Ben, you want to share a little bit on the insurance, maintenance, and HOAs?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines there. The insurance world is really, really changing. We've seen a lot more natural disasters here in the United States, around the world. There's been fires in Colorado, California, there's hurricanes. And so insurance is really rapidly changing right before our eyes. And so this is just something that you want to be aware of. The costs of insurance are increasing. Right now, here in Colorado, speaking for my personal insurance, my deductible has gone up, my premiums have gone up. And it's just something that you need to anticipate. Now, you always have the ability to shop the insurance around at any point. You can work with a larger company like American Family, State Farm, Allstate, but then there's also insurance brokers that you can work with as well, who have the ability to shop the insurance around. What's most important is that you're working with a reputable insurer. You know what your coverage amounts are. You don't want to be underinsured, and that you have a deductible and a premium that meets your needs and goals. So a lot of people don't understand or know this, but you do have the ability to change insurance companies at any point. And so typically what I'll do is I will look at my policies when they're up for renewal on the typically there's a 60-day renewal period where I'll get the notice of what that new premium is going to be that's going to take effect. For example, I might get the notice in the mail today, but it's not going to go into effect until October. And so if I'm going to shop the insurance, I'll have essentially a 60-day window there. So please know that you can do that. You also want to be aware of what you're getting into if there is an HOA. A lot of times with HOAs, not only is there going to be a monthly fee or a cost, but in most cases, there's also going to be covenants. In other words, requirements or restrictions as far as how you utilize the property. And every HOA has different covenants, but you want to make sure that you know what those are up front, just to make sure that what the restrictions is not going to limit or reduce how you want to use the property and your happiness. And you don't have any. Sometimes you can't leave cars out front. For example, one of the first homes that I bought in Phoenix, Arizona, I had left my car out on the curb and it got towed by the HOA. And that was kind of my introduction to an HOA. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you weren't allowed to leave cars out on the street overnight. And so every HOA is going to have different rules, different restrictions, different covenants. You just want to know what those are. You also want to know that HOA costs typically go up over time. It doesn't mean that they're wrong, that they're bad. Again, you just want to know what you're getting into and what you can expect today and moving forward.
And if you guys are looking at condos, it's also important to, in addition to the understanding the HOA fees, understanding what kind of capital reserves might exist in that condo community. Maybe they have a very low capital reserve and the property overall looks a little bit dilapidated. Maybe you can identify, maybe through that home inspection that you have done, the inspector says, man, this entire building's roof looks in really bad shape. Well, it's great to be aware of that so you don't overlook some additional hidden costs 5 years down the road where maybe you get hit with a massive, bill just to help account for paying for a new roof among your other neighbors in that building. So condos are another one where it's really, really important to not overlook any of these hidden costs. And that kind of leads me right into the second one, which is this home inspection and how important it is just to really understand always that you're never going to neglect this. The more you guys can be kind of understanding how important it is. I know there's a little bit of a cost involved, but there is such a huge amount of value in just assuring that you're not going into anything blindly and potentially going to have a much more costly issue down the road. So just make sure you're kind of taking our advice on that one if you can. And then third, this is probably the biggest one of all three that Ben and I haven't really talked too much about yet tonight, but just emotional decision making. And this is something that some of this is unavoidable. Everybody, we're all human beings. We all get really attached to things, especially the first time home buyer that finds this home that just really just fits all of the boxes. Maybe you've been looking for a long time and just really striking out. You finally find this house that you love and you're getting emotional about it, but that emotion is maybe clouding your judgment a bit. Maybe there's some massive issue with that sewer line that we've been talking about earlier as an example, or maybe, there's just other things that you're aware of, but you're kind of looking the other way just because you're so emotionally attached to the house and you just kind of want it so bad that you're willing and just kind of overlooking some of the stuff. So I know, Ben, you're really passionate about this one too. Maybe just give us a couple of your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think this is so important, not just with purchasing a home, but with money in general. Here in America, 79% of Americans live either paycheck to paycheck or have less than a $2,000 emergency fund saved. And the reason for that is because how our economy and how consumerism works. These marketing companies, all of these different Amazon, they try and relate to us emotionally to get us to feel like we need something or we want something. And then when you're emotional, you a lot of times don't make good decisions. And so that is why I believe that you should have a financial vision for your home purchase. You want to be able to define what those boundaries are. Give yourself a payment range. I'm comfortable paying between 2,000 to 2,500. I want my payment to be in that range. I'm looking to put X amount down as part of my down payment. When you know what your goals are, what your boundaries are, it allows for better decision making. But then you're also going to be able to give your real estate professional just so much more insight on what your goals are. And they're going to be able to help find you that property that meets all of those goals and boundaries that you have. So, now, having said that, I also love the emotional piece when you get to go in and walk a home for the first time, and I just love to allow my imagination kind of run wild. I'm a dad. I have 2 kids. I have 3 dogs, and I always just like I can envision my labradoodles running around and my kids fighting in the backyard. So it is fun to think of some of that stuff, but you don't want the emotions to lead your decision making.
Yeah, very well said. All right, guys. Well, so just next steps, just regardless of where you're at right now in this home buyer journey, I think what we really wanted to hit home tonight was just understanding that you don't have to already be at the phase of ready to go out and look at homes and write an offer on a house. This preparation phase is so important, and that's really what's going to be the best, I think, advantage for any aspiring home buyer right now is just to be as educated as possible going into this process. So maybe it's still 12 months out that you really want to be an active buyer. Just going through some of this still early on, and the first one being just contacting somebody like Ben, a mortgage professional, just to get that pre-approval. Because what we didn't talk about earlier is there are some examples where you might identify something today that really needs to get updated or changed before you're even going to be possibly able to qualify. An example would be if you're self-employed. Ben has a lot of experience with self-employed applicants, but in a lot of cases, you need to have 2 years worth of history for that new business as an entrepreneur, as a self-employed individual. So maybe you're not going out and looking at homes for another year, but at least by doing that pre-approval soon, you can identify maybe certain things that are going to take some time to get addressed. So then when a year from now, when you're ready to go, you're not caught off guard and have some big curveball thrown at you where you can't even qualify and get that pre-approval. Anything else on that note, Ben?
I always recommend, if you think that you're 4 to 6 months out from purchasing, at that point, go ahead and just start the pre-approval process, even if you think it's not immediate. And the reason for that is because you want to be prepared. You never know when you're going to find that perfect property. And one mistake that I see people make is they wait until they find the perfect property and then get pre-approved. Well, at that point, now they're scrambling. They're trying to get all their finances in order, gathered over to the lender. They're trying to apply. Meanwhile, they're also making some of those emotional decisions with the home. And again, if you do things in the right order, it allows you to make better decisions. It allows you to stay in control. And then that way, when you find the perfect home, you're going to be ready. There's not going to be any guesswork. At that point, you'll be able to pull the trigger immediately.
Mm-hmm. And then the next one, just working with a real estate expert, somebody like myself. The only thing I want to just remind you guys on that one is some of those tips that I shared earlier. One of those being just sitting down at the dinner table with whoever you might be living in this new home with and talking about some of those non-negotiables, just what's the most important to you, what are deal breakers, what are must-haves. Just even if you are a year out from buying a home, just start talking through a lot of that stuff. And in addition to that, that other tip that I had shared with you guys about the 3 aspects, which are price, location, and condition of the property, and just really trying to talk through with whoever else might be living in the new home with you, which of the 2 of those 3 are the most important, and start sharing that with somebody like myself so we can give you examples of what fits that criteria. So you really just understand what's out there and can maybe start, kind of having a pulse on what homes are coming on the market. If you start looking at least just from the sidelines for 6 months before it's your time to start actively pursuing a home, when that time comes, you can say, man, you know what? I've actually seen a lot of other homes similar to this one, but they were a little bit less expensive. Or, maybe you just start investigating certain neighborhoods a little bit closer because you've identified them as possible places you want to live, maybe you start finding certain things about those neighborhoods just by spending more time in those areas. Maybe start going out to eat in those areas more often, or find the neighborhood park and just using that as a new place to take your dog for a walk. And you know what? I love this neighborhood, but I really like especially being on the west side of this road because it's got this great park that's in walking distance. Just spending a little bit more time going through that stuff is really going to help you identify the best options when you are ready to start buying and looking at homes. These other educational resources we'll be sharing to you guys in an email after tonight. And the biggest one is just this last one, just staying informed and being patient. Don't rush into any decisions. That's when those emotions are going to get the best of you. By having that time on your side and just being very thorough with this, you're going to find the best deal you possibly can if you're following those steps. So all this stuff's going to be coming to you guys in an email in a little bit after tonight's masterclass wraps up here in a few minutes. You can also, if you don't want to wait, you want to get them now, feel free to scan this QR code, or you can just go to adamsoulsdenver.com. I've got a few of them, not all of them, but I've got a few of them also available there. You can also share this with any other friends or family that might also be interested in real estate here in Denver. Love to share this with as many people as I can. And one last little quick offer before we open up the Q&A. Both Ben and I are just really passionate about we love doing these webinars, but we really love just connecting with you guys on one-on-one basis. Setting up a Zoom call or just a phone call, whatever's easiest, but just being able to just find out a little bit more about your scenario, what's important to you, maybe some roadblocks or some challenges that you're facing right now, and how, maybe we can give you a few actionable tips and suggestions just to move yourself a little bit further down the road so you're ready. If you guys want to connect with Ben, I've shared his info here, but I'm also going to include all of his info in the follow-up email here that'll be sent out in about 30 minutes. So let's go ahead and just open it up now to some Q&A. Let me switch our screen over here, Ben. I noticed that there's a few throughout tonight's class in the chat. Did we get a lot of that covered? I haven't been monitoring the chat as much, Ben.
Yeah, I think we did, but I know there was one in regards from Edgar who was asking, is it even possible to buy a starter home anymore? It seems so expensive. Why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts on that one, Adam?
So I love a certain part of Denver that I actually grew up in with Ben, which is Wheat Ridge. So Ben and I both went to Wheat Ridge High School, and Wheat Ridge is one of these neighborhoods where if you do connect with a realtor that is very familiar with different parts of town, hopefully they can identify a few places where you have opportunities for fixer-uppers, maybe value-add type properties. And what I mean by this is kind of going back to those three things: price, location, and condition. Condition meaning the condition of the home. Wheat Ridge is a great example because a lot of the homes were built in like the 1940s, 1950s. And a lot of are still original homeowners that are in these homes, but they're getting to the age where they want to now maybe be in an assisted living. Maybe they're moving in with their kids. There's just a lot of different scenarios, but there's a lot of people in Wheat Ridge right now that are leaving. And there's a lot of homes in that area that have beautiful lots, mature trees, great neighborhoods, but maybe the home itself's a little bit older and needs some fixing up and some sweat equity put into it, meaning an opportunity maybe to still find that starter home, but it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be turnkey where you can just, walk in and it's perfect, ready to go. Maybe it's got kind of an old, outdated kitchen. Maybe the basement's unfinished. Maybe you can even get more creative and identify a couple of walls that can maybe be torn out because they're not load bearing, where you could even expand and create more of an open floor plan that's more popular these days. So there's still ways to make home ownership a reality with starter homes, but it just means that sometimes you might need to give a little bit more than later on in life when you have a little bit more of a budget, or you're just able to maybe afford a little bit higher price point of home. So there's definitely options out there when it comes to that type of scenario. And then also, condos are really popular for first-time home buyers or people that are looking for starter homes, and just realizing that that's not going to be your forever home, but it's still a great way to just get in the game and start continuing to build up equity in that property. And, a lot of times what happens is people will buy the starter home as a condo. I actually have a client right now that is dealing with this, where she bought this starter condo, lived in it for a few years, and then got married, had a little bit more income available, ended up buying another home that they moved into and started their family in. And now she has this starter home as a rental property. So there's a lot of cool ways that you can kind of transition later on. But the biggest thing that I know Ben and I are really, really passionate about is just getting in the game. The more
Yeah.
time you're on the sidelines, the more money is going out of your hands to a landlord. You're paying your rent, and that's not really benefiting you much at all. There's still definitely times that renting is probably the best, most smart thing to do, but just, really understanding that you don't need to be waiting and waiting and waiting because that perfect home is never coming around. It just means you might have to kind of, sacrifice on a few things. What about
Yeah,
you, Ben?
and I
Anything
I
else?
always love sharing the story of when I bought my first home. You had talked about the 3 things that are really important to consider when you're buying a home: location, price, and then, what was the
Condition.
3rd? Condition. And so, when I bought my first home, it was in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was a new home. It was in great condition. The price was very cheap. It was very affordable, but it wasn't in a great location.
Hmm.
And at the time, though, with where I was at, I still decided to move forward because it got me in the game of real estate. I became a homeowner. I was also able to put down a very small down payment on that first home. I qualified for an FHA loan and put a minimum 3.5% down. This is back in 2010. It only came out to about $3,000 that I had to make. That's where property values were back then. Well, I ended up selling that property in 2015. I walked away with around $70,000 in real estate proceeds. And I used that to buy my property here in Denver, Colorado in 2015 as well. And that property has continued to appreciate. And so that small $3,000 investment that I made with my down payment back in 2010 has literally turned into hundreds of thousands of dollars through real estate appreciation over time. It has also provided me with housing as well. And so in real estate, in the long term, when you have that long-term vision, one thing that I always say and recommend, I want my customers to really look over the next 5 to 10 years. What is your vision for yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do you imagine yourself being a homeowner in 5 years and in 10 years? And if the answer is yes, then you don't want to wait. Then you really want to consider buying today, because it's that real estate plus time equals the appreciation and amplifies those home ownership benefits. Now, if you don't know what the future holds for the next 5 years, if you don't know where you're going to be, or if you're going to be in the home, or if you have other plans and you're unsure, then at that point you might want to consider other things. But that example just shares how powerful real estate can be when you multiply that with time.
Don't wait to buy real estate. Buy real estate and wait. That's one of my favorite quotes.
Yes, sir. That's
What's
it.
the and maybe you don't know the exact number either, but so I don't want to butcher it. But the average net worth of a renter versus a buyer, isn't it like $2,500 is the average net worth of a renter, and the average net worth of a buyer is like 300,000 or something like that?
Yeah, it is. And that's because when you own a home, especially with leverage, uh, your equity position increases over time because the collateral, or the home itself, is going to go up in value. And so if you're renting, obviously you don't own that asset. And so that's why homeowners, their net worth is literally, you know, 20, 30, 50 fold that of renters. And your average homeowner has a net worth of over 100,000, six
Hmm.
figures.
I see Amy wrote a question. I know you kind of touched on this a minute ago, but just she asked, what's the real down payment for a first time home buyer? And then I think she maybe wrote still 3.5%, because I know you had teased that number a minute ago. Obviously, there's tons of factors going on here, but I think maybe a better way to answer this question is, I think the average down payment for all homes right now, I think it's actually more closer to like 8 to 10%. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the average. Now, different loan programs are going to have different minimum down payment requirements. FHA, for example, has a minimum down of 3.5%. Conventional has a minimum down of 5%. If you're a veteran and you have a certificate of eligibility, and that is in good standing, you're going to be eligible for 100% financing. If you're not a veteran, there are other programs to get that out of pocket or reduce down payment through down payment assistance. We are a preferred lender with CHFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, the largest non-for-profit housing agency in the state of Colorado. And they offer down payment assistance through their preferred lenders and have different loan programs out there. So they have grants that you can qualify for. They have silent second mortgages. That is a silent second mortgage that you don't make payments on. It's at 0% interest, and you just have to repay it when you sell the home or refinance it, or at the end of 30 years. So there are these different programs out there, and that's why you want to have a conversation with a lender just to see what your options are. When I hear of affordability challenges, I hear, there's two different sides to that. There's the down payment side. Someone needs help coming up with the down payment. But then there's also the monthly payment aside. So a lot of buyers are usually struggling with one or the other, in some cases both. But if I'm working with a buyer and they're really sensitive to that total out of pocket, well, a lot of times we can customize something to really help them meet their goals. In other cases, I'll be working with buyers who are a little bit more sensitive to the monthly payment. And we have loan programs there to get that interest rate lower, to get the payment lower. And so that's why you want to have these conversations with your qualified lender and let them know what your goals are, what's important to you.
Yeah, great advice. We didn't even talk about it tonight, but there's all types of different strategies also when it comes to a 2-1 buy down, 3-2-1 buy down. There's a lot of different ways even to just buy down some of the interest rate points initially for that first 1 or 2 years, maybe even 3 years, just to even further help with that affordability when it comes to that monthly amount you're paying. So something just to kind of keep in mind. I think just when I was listening to you answer that last question, maybe for a few people that are on tonight that are first-time home buyers that aren't that familiar, there's some of the lingo, the terminology that you've been using, FHA, conventional. Can you maybe just give a quick kind of a 60-second, explanation on just what the differences are, or at least just kind of a little bit additional clarity on that?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'm so glad that you asked that, Adam. There are a lot of different loan programs out there. So you have conventional. Now, you've probably heard the terms Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and that is in reference to conventional. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they have specific guidelines that must be followed in order for their loan to be eligible for purchase. And so if you are looking at a conventional loan, it needs to follow specific Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac guidelines, usually a little more strict, has a higher minimum down payment than some of the other loan programs. Credit usually needs to be a little bit higher. Qualifying is a little more difficult from a debt to income perspective. So it's usually a little more difficult to qualify for a conventional loan. And that's why FHA exists, which is a government loan program. So this is a government loan program. The government wants to support and advocate homeownership. So on FHA loans, credit is you can have much lower credit. You can credit. There's much more flexibility with credit. There's also a lot more flexibility with the qualifying ratios. You can have a higher debt to income ratio. You also have the benefit of having the option of putting less down. So that's kind of the biggest difference between those two. Then again, if you are a veteran and you have a certified or certificate of eligibility, you're going to be eligible for 100% financing as part of the VA loan program. And that has some incredible benefits as well. Interest rates that are lower. There's no mortgage insurance. But again, though, you do have to be a qualified veteran to be eligible for that.
And I know there's a lot to take in, you guys. So if that felt a little overwhelming, that's just a great example of just hopping on a one-on-one with Ben, just to ask a few additional questions, just get a little bit more clarity on what might best fit your specific scenario. So definitely
Let's
just want to
schedule a
reach out.
call.
Yeah, that's doesn't need to be something formal or that, serious. We're just both here happy to help in any way we can. So I think that's all the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. You guys, I really appreciate everybody that has stuck around till the end. We're at 90 minutes and there's still about half the people on tonight. So that's great. Really a good example of just people that are taking this seriously as far as just educating themselves and being proactive on just getting as much information as they can to be set up for success when that day comes. I know, Denver is definitely a pretty challenging market right now. But I do want to just end this tonight with my take on it being more of an optimistic closure to this tonight. So I think that we're definitely on the cusp of just seeing these interest rates get a little bit lower through the remainder of 2025 and going into 2026. Even something as small as a 0.5% lower rate. So instead of 6.25 I think it's 6.71 is what I shared with you guys this earlier in tonight's presentation. If we get down to like 6 or maybe low 6s, I think that's going to be enough to get a lot of these people off the sidelines. And when that happens, it's going to become a little bit more competitive again. So if you guys are, capable of making this a reality sooner, I just would leave you with, there are some great opportunities to be a home buyer right now. We talked about how it's the best time to be a home buyer in the past, like 13 years is what they're saying right now. So you have a lot of leverage. You have a lot of ability to negotiate, get a great deal. A lot of with real estate investing, which Ben's really big on, you don't make your money on the sale. You make really the most amount of money on any real estate investment on the buy side. So this is an example of a time where a lot of people that are not sitting on the sidelines, that are still understanding that things will get better, this is an opportunity to make a great real estate investment and really see a big return, whenever the date does come to sell that property. So just something just to kind of keep in mind, but more than anything else, just do it when it's right for you, and don't ever feel pressured or feel like you are making a decision that maybe you haven't thought all the way through. So
that's right. We're here as resources. We're here as guides. We're here to empower you to answer questions, but ultimately it's going to be your decision. And whether you're working with us or someone else, I just want to be a resource. I want to help educate. I want to make sure that you feel good about the steps that you're taking and the path that you're going down.
Yeah, love that. Well, thanks, Ben, so much for joining us again tonight. You got a ton of great value and information you provided all of us, including myself. So thanks. And for you guys, just one last plug. If you enjoyed tonight, feel free to share this with any other people that you might know that are also interested in real estate. We host these every single month, and we share new content every time. So even the people that are on tonight, if you guys want to join us on the next one, we'd love to see you back. And don't be a stranger. Reach out with any questions, any way that we can help. We'd be happy to do so. Thanks again for all of your time tonight. We'll see you guys hopefully soon.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great night.